The clock on the wall showed 11 at night when Marcus Cole pushed his cleaning cart through the empty hallways of the Galactic Integration Academy, and the wheels made a soft squeaking sound that echoed off the polished floors like a lonely song in the darkness. Had worked here for 3 years now, ever since his wife passed away and left him alone with their daughter Lily, and he needed a job with night shifts so he could take care of her during the day. The academy was not like any school on Earth before the aliens came, and it held children from 12 different species whose parents worked as diplomats or traders or refugees seeking safety on this blue planet called home. Marcus did not mind the strange sights he saw every night. The slime trails left by the Quilori students, the scorch marks from the Paraxian hatchlings, the floating furniture moved by the telekinetic Varn children who forgot to put things back where they found them. He simply cleaned it all up without complaint because that was his job, and because he understood that children were children no matter how many eyes or tentacles or wings they had tonight. The East Wing cafeteria was his last stop before his break, and he looked forward to sitting down and eating the cold pizza slice he had saved from dinner with Louie. She had insisted he take the last piece because she said daddies needed to eat too, and he had smiled and tucked it into his lunch bag like it was treasure. The cafeteria was dark except for the emergency lights that cast a pale blue glow over the empty tables and chairs, and Marcus began his routine of checking under tables for forgotten items and wiping down surfaces. He was humming an old song his mother used to sing when he heard something that made him stop. It was a small sound, barely louder than a whisper, but it was unmistakably the sound of crying. Marcus set down his spray bottle and listened carefully, trying to locate where the sound came from, and after a moment he realized it was coming from the far corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. He walked slowly toward the sound, not wanting to frighten whoever was there, and as he got closer, he could see a small shape huddled beneath one of the tables. At first, he thought it might be a lost pet, or perhaps one of the robotic cleaning assistants that sometimes malfunctioned. But then he saw the scales. They were black as midnight, but shimmered with hints of violet and purple when the light touched them, and they belonged to a creature no bigger than a house cat curled into a tight ball. It was a Paraxian hatchling, one of the dragon-like children from the fire-breathing species that had joined the Galactic Council just 5 years ago. And she was crying so hard that her small body shook with each sob. Marcus had seen Paraxian adults before. They were tall and proud and terrifying with their blazing eyes and smoke that curled from their nostrils. But this little one looked nothing like bad. She looked broken. He knelt down slowly, his knees creaking in protest, and he kept his voice soft and gentle the way he did when Lily had nightmares. "Hey there, little one," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" The hatchling flinched so hard she bumped her head on the underside of the table, and her ember-colored eyes went wide with something that looked like fear mixed with confusion. "You speak to me?" she whispered in accented English, her voice rough from crying. "Well, sure I do," Marcus replied with a small smile. "That is generally how conversations work." The hatchling stared at him like he had just performed some impossible magic trick, and Marcus realized she was genuinely shocked that he had addressed her at all. "I am nobody," she said quietly. "You are worker here, yes?" Workers do not speak to Paraxian children. This is not proper. Marcus felt something twist in his chest at those words, at the way this tiny creature said them like they were simple facts of the universe. "I am a janitor," he said gently, "and my name is Marcus. What is yours?" She hesitated for a long moment, her wings twitching nervously against her back. And then she answered in a voice barely above a whisper, "I am called Kirith." Well, Kirith," Marcus said as he settled into a more comfortable position on the floor. "Would you like to tell me why you were crying under a table at 11 o'clock at night?" The question seemed to break something inside her, and fresh tears spilled from her ember eyes as she shook her head rapidly. "I cannot tell," she said. "It is shameful." "You would not understand." Marcus nodded slowly because he knew better than to push a frightened child. And instead he simply sat there with her in the darkness, offering his presence without demands. They stayed like that for several minutes, the silence broken only by her occasional sniffles. And then Kirith spoke again. "Why do you stay?" she asked with genuine confusion in her voice. "You have work to do, yes?" "I am not your concern. Everyone is my concern," Marcus replied simply. "Especially kids who are crying alone in the dark." Kirith tilted her head, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. And her scales rippled with colors Marcus could not name. "You are strange human," she said finally. "I have been called worse things," Marcus chuckled softly. And to his surprise, a tiny almost smile flickered across the hatchling's face. He reached for his lunch bag and pulled out the pizza slice wrapped in foil. And his stomach growled in protest as the smell of pepperoni filled the air. Kirith's nostrils flared, and her eyes locked onto the food with an intensity that startled him. And in that moment, Marcus recognized something he had seen before. It was hunger, not the casual hunger of someone who missed a meal, but the deep, desperate hunger of someone who had not eaten properly in a very long time. He had seen that look in the mirror during the hard months after his wife died, when he skipped meals so Lily could eat. And he had seen it in the eyes of children at the homeless shelter where he volunteered on weekends. Without thinking, he held out the pizza slice toward her. "Are you hungry?" he asked, gently. Kirith's eyes went even wider, and she pressed herself back against the wall like he had offered her something dangerous. "Sir," she whispered with a trembling voice. "I cannot eat." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Marcus did not yet understand. And he looked at this small, frightened creature who was so clearly starving, yet claimed she could not eat. "Why not?" he asked softly. Kirith opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. And instead, she simply started crying again. Marcus did not push for an explanation. Instead, he set the pizza slice down on the clean floor between them and spoke in the same gentle voice he used when Lily was scared. "How about we just sit here together for a while," he said. "And if you feel like talking or eating or anything else, you just let me know. I am not going anywhere." And so they sat together in the darkness, a human janitor and an alien dragon child, while the clock ticked past midnight and the pizza grew cold between them. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like hours. But Marcus did not mind because he had learned long ago that some things could not be rushed. Lily had taught him that when she was 4 years old and refused to speak for 3 days after her mother's funeral. And he had simply sat with her and held her hand until she was ready. Kirith reminded him of Lily in those dark days, small and scared and carrying a weight far too heavy for such young shoulders. Finally, the little dragon shifted slightly, and her eyes moved back to the pizza slice that sat between them like an offering. "You truly do not know," she whispered. "Do you?" "Know what?" Marcus asked gently. Kirith let out a shaky breath, and smoke should have curled from her nostrils, but nothing came. And Marcus noticed that her scales seemed duller than the Paraxian children he had seen in the hallways during the day. "I am broken," she said quietly. "I am what my people call hollow. Do you understand this word?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "Among the Paraxian Dominion," Kirith explained with shame thick in her voice, "worth is measured by fire. The hotter your flame and the purer your scales, the greater your value. My father is Ambassador Varanak, one of the most powerful dragons in all the Dominion." She paused, and her small claws scraped against the floor nervously. "But I was born wrong," she continued. "I have something called thermal displacement syndrome. My body cannot process Paraxian food properly, and I cannot produce fire. I have never breathed even a single spark. Marcus felt his heart ache at the way she said these words. Like she was confessing to some terrible crime, rather than describing a medical condition she had no control over. "My father calls me his greatest shame," Kirith whispered. "He sent me here to Earth so he would not have to look at me. He told everyone it was for diplomacy, but really he just wanted me gone." "That is not okay," Marcus said firmly. And there was an edge to his voice that surprised even him. No father should ever say such things to his child. Kirith looked at him with confusion again. Like his anger on her behalf was something she could not process. "But it is true," she said simply. "I am defective. The doctors at home said I would never be normal, and my father said I should at least have the dignity to fade quietly." Marcus felt rage burn in his chest at those words, at the idea of anyone telling a child to simply disappear. But he kept his voice calm for her sake. "You said you cannot eat," he said gently. "What did you mean by that?" Kirith's eyes filled with fresh tears, and she hugged her wings around herself like armor. "Paraxian food is very specific," she explained. "It contains minerals and compounds that fuel our internal fire. But because of my condition, my body rejects most of it. I try to eat what the Academy gives me, but it makes me sick every time." "When was the last time you actually kept food down?" Marcus asked with growing concern. The little dragon was quiet for a long moment before she answered. 11 days. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach, and he stared at her with horror he could not hide. 11 days? He repeated, "You have not eaten anything in 11 days? "I have tried," Kirith said defensively, "but everything they give me comes back up. The nutritional staff says I must only eat approved Paraxian rations because my father gave them strict orders. They say if I just try harder, I will adjust." Marcus thought about the people who had given those orders and felt a cold fury settle into his bones. "Has anyone tried giving you different food?" he asked. "Food from Earth, maybe?" Kirith shook her head quickly. "That is forbidden," she said. "My father says I must maintain Paraxian cultural purity. He says eating alien food would make me even more of an embarrassment." Marcus looked at the pizza slice and then back at the starving child in front of him. And in that moment, he made a decision that he knew might cost him his job. "Kirith," he said gently, "I want you to try something for me. Just one small bite of this pizza." Her eyes went wide with fear. "I cannot," she said quickly. "It is against the rules and my father would be so angry. And what if it makes me sicker and—" "Hey," Marcus interrupted softly. "I raised a daughter with terrible food allergies. I know what hunger looks like when it wears the mask of obedience. You are starving and you are scared, and I'm not going to let a child suffer when I have food right here." He picked up the pizza slice and tore off a tiny piece no bigger than his thumbnail. "One small bite," he said. "If it hurts, we stop immediately, and I will never mention it again. But you do not have to be hungry tonight." Kirith stared at the tiny piece of pizza like it might explode, and her whole body trembled with fear and longing mixed together. "What if my father finds out?" she whispered. "Then I will deal with your father," Marcus said firmly. "That is not your problem. Your only job right now is to take care of yourself." The little dragon hesitated for one more heartbeat, and then, with shaking claws, she took the piece of pizza. From his hand, she sniffed it carefully, and her nostrils flared at the unfamiliar scent of cheese and tomato sauce and processed meat. Then she put it in her mouth and chewed. Marcus watched her closely, ready to help if something went wrong. But instead of pain, he saw something miraculous happen. Kirith's eyes went wide, and her scales suddenly shimmered with colors he had not seen before. Bright purples and deep blues swirling across her body like northern lights. She swallowed and waited, her whole body tense with anticipation of the nausea that always followed eating. But it did not come. "It does not hurt," she whispered with disbelief. "My stomach does not hurt," Marcus smiled and handed her the rest of the tiny piece. Want some more? She ate the next piece faster, and then the next. And before long, she had devoured the entire slice while tears streamed down her face, but these were not tears of sadness. I feel full, she sobbed. I have never felt full before. Is this what it is supposed to feel like? Marcus felt his own eyes grow wet as he watched this small creature experience something as simple as a full stomach for the very first time. Yeah, little one, he said softly. That is what it is supposed to feel like. Kirith crawled out from under the table and did something that surprised them both. She climbed into his lap and pressed her face against his chest and cried. Marcus wrapped his arms around her gently, mindful of her wings, and held her while she shook with emotions too big for her small body. Thank you, she whispered between sobs. Thank you, thank you. You're very welcome, Marcus said quietly. You are so very welcome. Outside the cafeteria windows, the stars shone bright and cold, witnesses to a moment that would change everything. The next morning, Marcus did something that scared him more than anything had scared him in years. He walked into the academy's medical wing and asked to speak with the head physician, Dr. Sarah Chun, who was a tall woman with kind eyes and silver streaks in her black hair. And she had worked with alien species for over a decade since first contact. When Marcus told her what had happened the night before, her face went through several emotions. Confusion, then shock, then a kind of quiet fury that matched what Marcus had felt in that dark cafeteria. You are telling me, she said slowly, that a Paraxian hatchling has been unable to eat for 11 days, and nobody in my medical staff reported this to me? She said the nutritional team told her to try harder, Marcus replied. They were following orders from her father, apparently. Dr. Chun pulled up Kirith's medical file on her computer, and her expression grew darker with every line she read. Thermal displacement syndrome, she muttered. I have seen this condition mentioned in Paraxian medical texts, but they always described it as untreatable. They never even considered that alternative food sources might work because they did not want to consider it. Marcus finished for her. Because admitting that alien food could help would mean admitting that their cultural purity rules were hurting their own children. The doctor looked at him with new respect in her eyes. You figured all that out from one conversation with a crying child. I figured it out from being a dad, Marcus said simply. When your kid cannot eat something, you find something else. You do not tell them to try harder and watch them starve. Dr. Chun nodded slowly and then picked up her communicator. I am calling an emergency nutritional assessment, she said. We need to run proper tests and find out exactly which Earth foods are compatible with her system. If this works the way you described, we might be able to help other Paraxian children with similar conditions. For the next 3 days, everything seemed hopeful. The medical team ran tests and discovered that Kirith's body could process Earth proteins and carbohydrates almost perfectly. The pizza had been just the beginning, and soon she was eating pasta and bread and fruits and vegetables. With no negative reactions at all, her scales began to shine brighter, and her energy increased, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she actually smiled during the day when other students could see. Her Marcus visited her every night during his shift and brought her different foods to try, and they would sit together in the cafeteria and talk about everything and nothing. She asked him about his daughter Lily, and he showed her photos on his phone. And Kirith declared that Lily had excellent taste in hair ribbons. He asked her about her home world, and she told him about the Great Fire Mountains and the crystal caves and the way the sky turned purple at sunset for 3 beautiful days. It seemed like everything might be okay. Then Ambassador Veranek found out the call, came to the academy director at precisely 9 in the morning. And by 9:30, Marcus had been summoned to the administrative office. He had never been in this part of the building before. It was all polished wood and expensive. art and windows that looked out over the academy. Gardens where children of a dozen species played together. The director was a nervous man named Peterson who kept adjusting his tie, like it was trying to strangle him. And beside him stood a Paraxian adult that Marcus recognized from news broadcasts' ambassador. Veranek was everything his daughter was not. Tall and proud and radiating heat that made the air shimmer around him. With scales of pure obsidian and eyes like molten gold, he looked at Marcus the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their dinner plate. "This is the one?" Veranek asked in a voice like grinding stones. "Yes, Ambassador," Director Peterson said quickly. "This is Marcus Cole, the janitor who fed unauthorized sustenance to my daughter," the ambassador interrupted. "Who violated 17 different interspecies protocols and committed an act of cultural contamination against a noble-born Paraxian." Marcus stood very still and kept his face calm even though his heart was pounding. "Your daughter was starving," he said quietly. "She had not kept food down in 11 days. Veranek's eyes narrowed and smoke curled from his nostrils in a way that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of a predator about to strike. "My daughter's dietary needs are not your concern," the ambassador said coldly. "You are a cleaner of floors. You are nothing. And yet you dared to interfere with Paraxian cultural practices. Your cultural practices were killing her," Marcus replied. And he was surprised by how steady his voice remained. The ambassador's scales flared with heat, and Director Peterson made a small frightened sound. "You will not speak to me in such a manner," Veranek snarled. "I have already filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council. You will be terminated from your position immediately and barred from any future contact with non-human species." Director Peterson wrung his hands nervously. "Ambassador, please," he said. "Surely we can discuss this. Mr. Cole has been an exemplary employee, and he was only trying to help. He was trying to humiliate me." Veranek interrupted. He saw an opportunity to make the Paraxian Dominion look barbaric, and he took it. "This is obviously a coordinated attack on our reputation." Marcus almost laughed at how absurd that was. "I am a janitor," he said flatly. "I make $12 an hour, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my 7-year-old daughter. I am not coordinating anything except my cleaning schedule." The ambassador ignored him and turned to the director. "The hearing will be held in 3 days," he said. "I expect this human to be suspended until then, and I expect the Academy to cooperate fully with the investigation." Director Peterson nodded quickly, too afraid to argue. "Of course, Ambassador, of course." Veranek swept out of the office without another glance at Marcus. Leaving behind the smell of smoke and sulfur and contempt, Director Peterson sank into his chair and looked at Marcus with a mixture of pity and frustration. "I am sorry, Mr. Cole," he said, "but I have no choice. You are suspended effective immediately. Please hand in your badge and cleaning supplies before you leave." Marcus felt the weight of what was happening settle onto his shoulders, and he thought about Lily and the rent that was due next week and the grocery bills that never seemed to stop, but mostly he thought about a little dragon girl who had finally learned what it felt like to be full. "Can I at least say goodbye to her?" he asked. Director Peterson shook his head. "The ambassador has forbidden any contact between you and his daughter." "I am sorry, but my hands are tied." Marcus nodded slowly and took off his badge. "For what it is worth," he said as he set it on the desk. "I would do it again." The director sighed heavily. "I know," he said. "And that is what makes this so difficult." Marcus walked out of the academy and into the cold morning air. And he did not look back because he knew if he did, he would see Kirith's face in every window. The hearing was held in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Integration Academy, a massive room with curved walls that displayed flags from every species that had joined the Earth Alliance. Marcus sat alone at a small table facing a panel of judges that included Director Peterson 2 human diplomats, a representative from the Galactic Council, and of course Ambassador Voranek, who sat at the center with his golden eyes fixed on Marcus like a predator watching prey. The gallery behind him was filled with observers. Reporters from Earth news networks, delegates from various alien species, Academy staff members who whispered among themselves. Marcus had worn his only suit, the one he had bought for his wife's funeral, and it still fit even though he had lost weight since those dark days. He had not been able to afford a lawyer, so he was representing himself, and he knew that the odds were stacked against him in ways he could not even begin to understand. First hour of the hearing was a blur of legal language and diplomatic protocols that Marcus barely followed. Ambassador Voranek's representatives presented their case with cold precision. Marcus had violated interspecies contact regulations, had interfered with Paraxian cultural practices, had acted without authorization, had potentially endangered a minor by feeding her untested substances. They made it sound like he had committed some terrible crime instead of giving a hungry child a slice of pizza when it was his turn to speak. Marcus stood slowly and looked at the panel of judges. "I am not a diplomat," he said. "I do not know all the rules and regulations you have been talking about. I am a janitor and a father, and 3 nights ago I found a little girl crying under a table because she was starving to death and nobody was helping her." He paused and let those words settle into the silence. "I had food and she was hungry, so I gave her something to eat. That is all I did. I did not think about politics or cultural purity or diplomatic relations. I thought about a child who needed help." Ambassador Voranek's scales rippled with irritation. The defendant admits to acting without regard for established protocols, he said. "This only proves our case. Your protocols were killing your daughter," Marcus replied calmly. "With respect, Ambassador, that seems more important to me than paperwork." The gallery murmured, and several of the judges shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the human diplomats, a woman named Ambassador Harris, leaned forward with interest in her eyes. "Mr. Cole," she said, "are you aware that your actions may have damaged relations between Earth and the Paraxian Dominion?" "I am aware that is what Ambassador Voranek claims," Marcus said. "But I would ask the panel to consider something. If feeding a starving child is enough to damage our relationship with an alien species, maybe that relationship was not built on anything worth protecting." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Voranek rose from his seat with smoke pouring from his nostrils and his claws digging into the table. "You dare to lecture this panel about the value of Paraxian relations?" he snarled. "You are nothing but a servant. You clean floors for a living. You have no right to speak about matters so far above your station." "My station," Marcus said quietly, "is wherever a child needs help. That has always been true, and that will always be true. I do not care if she is human or Paraxian or anything else. A hungry kid is a hungry kid." The ambassador opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance. The doors of the Grand Assembly Hall burst open, and everyone turned to see who had interrupted these solemn proceedings. It was Kira Eth. She stood in the doorway looking small and scared, but also determined in a way that made Marcus's heart swell with pride. 2 Paraxian guards moved to stop her, but she dodged around them with surprising speed and ran down the center aisle toward the judges' panel. "I wish to speak," she declared, and her voice only trembled a little bit. Ambassador Voranek's face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "Remove her immediately," he commanded. "She has no standing in these proceedings." "Actually," Ambassador Harris said with a slight smile, "under Galactic Council regulations, a minor who is directly affected by the outcome of a hearing has the right to provide testimony. I believe we should hear what she has to say." The other judges nodded their agreement. Even Director Peterson, who looked like he wished he could disappear through the floor careth, climbed onto the witness platform and faced the panel. Her small body straight and her amber eyes bright with emotions she was struggling to control. "My name is Kirith," she said, "daughter of Ambassador Voranak of the Paraxian Dominion. I am 8 years old, and I was born with a condition that my people consider shameful." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "For my whole life, I have been told that I am defective and worthless and hollow. I have been told that I should fade quietly because I cannot produce fire and because I cannot eat properly. My father sent me to Earth because he did not want to look at me anymore." The gallery had gone completely silent, and several of the observers looked horrified. "When I came to this academy, I was given Paraxian food that made me sick every single time. The staff told me to try harder. My father told them not to experiment with options because he said cultural purity was more important than my health." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. 11 days ago, I stopped being able to eat anything at all. I was starving, and I was scared, and I hid under a table in the cafeteria because I did not know what else to do. She turned and looked directly at Marcus, and there were tears in her eyes, but also something fierce and bright. This human found me there. He did not know who I was or who my father was. He just saw a hungry child, and he gave me his dinner. He was kind to me when nobody else was. She turned back to the panel, and her next words came out in a rush. "Humans have a saying that I learned from him. They say no child should go hungry. They do not add exceptions for species or status or cultural rules. They just mean it." Kirith faced her father then, and Marcus saw something incredible happen. Smoke began to curl from her nostrils. Thin and pale, but unmistakably real. "You called me hollow," she said to Voranak. "But the only emptiness I ever felt was the one you put inside me. This human showed me more kindness in one night than you have shown me in my entire life." The smoke grew thicker, and her scales began to shimmer with colors that rippled across her body like fire beneath ice. "I am not hollow," she declared. "I was just hungry. And now I know that there are beings in this universe who will feed a starving child without asking permission first." She lifted her head high and looked at the panel of judges. "If you punish this man for saving my life," she said clearly, "then everything the Galactic Council says about unity and cooperation and protecting the innocent is a lie." The chamber erupted into chaos as reporters shouted questions and delegates argued, and Ambassador Voranak stood frozen with an expression of pure shock on his face. But Marcus did not notice any of that. He only saw Kirith, small and brave and finally breathing smoke. And he had never been more proud of anyone in his entire life. The vote was unanimous in Marcus Cole's favor. The panel of judges ruled that his actions had been not only justified, but heroic. And they issued a formal commendation that would go into his permanent record as a citizen of Earth Ambassador. Harris personally apologized to him for the stress he had endured, and she announced that the Galactic Health Coalition would be launching an immediate investigation into Paraxian treatment of children. With atypical conditions, Director Peterson offered Marcus his job back with a raise and a new title, Senior Facility Coordinator, which was really just a fancy way of saying head janitor, but it came with better hours and actual benefits. Ambassador Voranak was quietly recalled to the Paraxian homeworld 2 weeks after the hearing, and the official statement said it was for diplomatic reassignment. But everyone knew the truth. He had become an embarrassment to his own government. And the Paraxian Council did not tolerate embarrassment. He never contacted his daughter again. And Kirith said she did not mind because she had never really had a father anyways. Academy offered to place her with a diplomatic foster family, some wealthy couple who could give her access to the finest education and opportunities that Earth could offer. Kirith politely declined. "I already have a family," she said. And everyone knew exactly who she meant. the paperwork took 3 months because interspecies guardianship was complicated and there were forms that had to be invented specifically for this situation, but eventually it was done. And Kirith officially moved into the small 2-bedroom apartment where Marcus and Lily lived. They had to rearrange the furniture to make room for her nest, which was really just a pile of blankets and pillows that she insisted on sleeping in because Paraxians did not use beds. Lily was thrilled to have a sister, even one who was technically a dragon, and occasionally set the curtains on fire by accident when she sneezed. Marcus had to buy a fire extinguisher and learn how to cook foods that worked for both a human child and a Paraxian hatchling, which turned out to be mostly pasta with different sauces on. The weekends he would take both girls to the park and watch them play together, Kirith chasing Lily with puffs of smoke while Lily shrieked with laughter and pretended to be a knight fighting a dragon. Other parents would stare sometimes, but Marcus did not care, because his daughters were happy, and that was all that mattered. Dr. Chun continued to work with Kirith and discovered that proper earth nutrition was actually helping her condition improve. The smoke that had first appeared during the hearing grew stronger over time, and 1 year after the trial she produced her first real flame. It was small, barely bigger than a candle's worth, but Kirith stared at it with tears streaming down her face, and Marcus held her while she cried happy tears for the first time in her life. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." "I knew you could," Marcus said softly. "I always knew." The years passed faster than Marcus expected, the way they always do when you are busy raising children and working and trying to keep up with a world that changes too quickly. Kirith grew taller and stronger, and her flames grew brighter, and she discovered a passion for science that surprised everyone, including herself. She wanted to understand why Earth food had saved her when Paraxian food could not, and that curiosity led her to study xenobiology and then nutritional science and then medicine. Lily grew up too and became a teacher at the very academy where her father had once pushed a cleaning cart through empty hallways. She specialized in helping young aliens adjust to life on Earth, and she always told her students that the most important thing was kindness, that borders and species and cultural rules meant nothing when someone needed help. Marcus retired at 65 and spent his days tending a small garden behind the house they eventually bought together, all 3 of them pooling their savings for a place with enough room for a proper nest. He was 73 years old, and his hair was completely gray when Kirith called to tell him she had been invited to speak at the Galactic Nutritional Sciences Summit. "They want me to give the keynote address," she said with disbelief in her voice. "Me? The hollow one?" "You were never hollow," Marcus replied gently. "You were just waiting for someone to see you properly." The summit was held in a massive auditorium that seated 10,000 beings from across the galaxy, and Marcus sat in the front row with Lily beside him and watched his daughter take the stage. Dr. Kirith Cole, the program said, xenobiologist, author of the compatibility principle, and the first Paraxian to earn a Terran medical doctorate. She looked so different from the tiny frightened creature he had found crying under a cafeteria table all those years ago. Tall and proud, with scales that shimmered like galaxies and eyes that burned with quiet confidence, behind her a massive screen displayed a photograph that Marcus had almost forgotten existed. A grainy image taken by a security camera, showing a little dragon eating pizza under a table, while a janitor's mop leaned against the wall nearby. "Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy," Kirith began, and her voice carried across the auditorium with perfect clarity. "They are not the fastest or the oldest or the most technologically advanced." She paused and let her words settle into the silence. "Their planet is small and their lifespans are short, and they have only been traveling among the stars for a single generation." Marcus smiled because he knew what was coming. But when a child is hungry, Kirith continued, "Humans do not ask for permission to help. They do not calculate the political cost or consult the proper protocols. They simply give what they have." Her ember eyes found him in the front row, and she smiled, smoke curling warmly from her nostrils. 30 years ago, a human janitor found a starving alien child and gave her his dinner. He did not know that she was the daughter of an ambassador. He did not know that his kindness would cause an interstellar incident. He only knew that she was hungry and he had food. She straightened her shoulders and addressed the entire assembly. That is what humans do. That is what makes them remarkable. And that is why the galaxy will never be the same. The applause that followed was thunderous. But Marcus barely heard it because he was too busy wiping tears. From his eyes, Lily squeezed his hand and leaned close to whisper in his ear. "She learned that from you, Dad." Marcus shook his head. With a small laugh, "No," he said softly. "I just reminded her of something she already knew. That everyone deserves kindness, especially the ones who have been told they do not." After the speech, they went out for pizza, just the three of them. The way they had done every Friday night for as long as any of them could remember. Kirith ordered pepperoni because she said it was still her favorite, even after all these years. And Marcus watched his two daughters laugh and argue about nothing important and felt his heart overflow with gratitude. He had never asked for fame or recognition, or any of the attention that had come from that night so long ago. He had only wanted to help a hungry child. And in return, he had been given a family beyond anything he could have imagined. Later, that night, when the restaurant was closing and they were walking back to their car beneath a sky full of stars, Kirith took his hand the way she had when she was small. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For the pizza and the family and for seeing me when nobody else would." Marcus squeezed her clawed hand gently and smiled up at the stars. "You are welcome, little one," he said. "You are so very welcome." And somewhere in the vast darkness between worlds, the universe itself seemed to agree that some kindnesses are too important to ever be forgotten.